The COVID situation in China has aggravated in the last few months, with the highly infectious Omicron variant breaking the country's tight virus defenses. After a fresh surge in China, the authorities decided to start mass testing of millions of residents as part of an unprecedented scheme designed to identify and stop the spread of the virus. In most of the populous cities of China, deaths had started soaring even as a strict lockdown is taking a toll on millions of residents. One thing that is emerging from the current crisis is China's dubious response to the outbreak. Experts are questioning the country's fishy response to the pandemic in 2019. China had largely kept COVID at bay, following the first outbreak in 2020. China was relatively COVID-free throughout 2021 because of the strict lockdowns and travel restrictions. While all these caused immense frustration, the country was successful in preventing a major health crisis. But then came Omicron, which led to the surge in daily infections. Despite being an $18 trillion economy, China was unable to manage the crisis. So, to bring back the country to normalcy, China resorted to the zero-COVID policy. But now, the zero-COVID policy has turned a health crisis into a political one. Over the past few weeks, China has witnessed both an increasingly severe coronavirus outbreak and an explosion of protests against its zero-COVID policy. Protesters in several major Chinese cities have expressed their anger over the country's stringent zero-COVID policy. This is the biggest wave of demonstrations since the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989, creating an unprecedented challenge for the Chinese president. All of these exposes the failure of the Chinese government. On the other hand, the Indian government has successfully overcome the pandemic. India has set an example, one that the whole world is now talking about, debating and writing papers on. How did the world's second most populous country tame the highly contagious virus? In contrast, is China really richer than India? In China, it was being called a pandemic disaster. Whereas, India is standing tall as a pandemic success story. So, what are the reasons behind this? The first and foremost reason for the failure is the low efficiency of the Chinese vaccine. Chinese homegrown vaccine is said to be less effective than its Indian counterpart. Efficacy rates are an estimated 50.4% for Sinovac and 66% for CanSino, whereas the efficacy for Covishield and Covaxin stands at 70% and 78% respectively. It's not only about the efficacy of the vaccine, but also the inefficiency of the government to achieve full vaccination. Prabhat Jha, an epidemiology professor at the University of Toronto, said that the overall toll in China has surged due to the large number of unvaccinated elderly people. Whereas, India started its vaccination campaign by prioritizing elderly people. And look at India's vaccine story, for example. India had successfully run the world's largest vaccination program. It was driven by two Made in India vaccines. India had also battled the vaccine hesitancy. Instead of engaging in vaccine politics, Indian leaders are leading the vaccination drive from the front. And India did not stop there. India also nursed the distressed nations through vaccine Maitri. India had delivered more than 16 crore doses of vaccines to 96 countries with compassion. China had also offered vaccines but with an intention to buy support, whereas India gifted vaccines with an intention to extend support. So, majority of the nations refused Chinese vaccines. The world's so-called developed economies were focused on their own problems, while India helped its friends bounce back. Have a look at the statement of the Jamaican Foreign Affairs Minister about India's generosity.
From the very outset, the Republic of India was a reliable partner and friend. whose assistance was critical to our pandemic response. Despite its own challenges and responsibilities, as just elucidated by our colleague Hugh, enabled by its advanced pharmaceutical capacity, India embraced a holistic and outward-looking vaccine diplomacy strategy. As a result, Jamaica was able to secure its first life-saving vaccines from India.
What else did India do? It drew on its past experiences, identified and leveraged its current strengths, and set a goal for a safe future. India's success lies in its democratic policy, whereas China's failure lies in its autocratic policy. The way India executed lockdowns and travel restrictions is a lesson for the world. Speaking of templates, India did not blindly follow the systems put in place by any other country. India took into account its strengths and challenges and created a template of its own. This is why India was successful in containing COVID. Ultimately, China implemented the policies irrationally, and it is high time China should learn from India. China should stop colonizing poor countries through debt trap and focus on its citizens' welfare. If not, China will dig its own grave.